Welcome everybody to this meeting of the Adults, Children and Health Overview and Scrutiny panel. My name is Councillor Jodie Grove and I will be chairing this meeting. This meeting is being held in person via Zoom and streamed live to the public on YouTube. I remind all attendees that participation in the meeting indicates consent to the audio and video being streamed live, and acknowledgement that after the meeting it will continue to be available in the public domain. We're not expecting the fire alarm to sound this evening. However, if it does, please may I ask that you leave in an orderly fashion and rendezvous across the road outside of the library next to the fountain. Firstly, it would be useful if all voting members and officers could introduce themselves so that the public are aware of who is in this meeting and the role they will be undertaking. So as I said, my name is Councillor Jodie Grove and I'm chairing the meeting today, and I will hand over to the Vice Chair.
Councillor Devon Davis, Vice Chair.
Simon Bond, Councillor and member of the panel.
Clive Baskerville, voting member of the panel.
Councillor George Shaw, member of the panel.
Mark Jervis, co-opted member just on education matters.
Purnima Karna Kadacharan, co-opkey.
Councillor Carol Costa, member of the panel.
Councillor Gosling, voting member of the panel.
Good evening, Kevin McDaniel, Executive Director for Adult Services, Health and Communities at the Council.
Thank you, everybody. And we've got a couple of attendees online, so I'll pass over. Oni, did you want to go first?
Good evening, Tony Wilson, Director of Education for the Diocese of Oxford, and I am a co-opted member of the panel.
Thank you. And now Lynn.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair. I'm Lynn Ferguson, Executive Director of Children's Services and Education, and apologies I can't be with you in person tonight.
Brilliant. Thank you both. I request that the meeting participants do not speak unless I specifically invite you to do so. Once I've invited you to speak, before you do so, please state your name and the capacity in which you're speaking, if appropriate. Well, we've all just introduced ourselves, so we won't worry about that bit. I would also ask officers to speak at appropriate times. If any individual attempts to disrupt the meeting, I am able to use my powers in the Constitution to adjourn the meeting or have the individual removed. I would like to also remind councillors that to improve our time and effectiveness as a committee, I would ask you to please limit the repetition of points or questions which have already been raised by others. Where possible, please put forward all new points or questions which you would like raised during your request to speak. We will now start on the agenda items. Do we have any apologies for absence?
No, Chair, we have no apologies for absence.
Thank you. Okay, next on the agenda is the minutes for the last meeting that was held. Oh, apologies. Declarations of interest. I'm jumping ahead. Does anyone have any declarations of interest? Nope. Perfect. And back to my last point. Carol.
I've been told by legal services that I have to declare that I sacrifice a percentage of my councillors' allowance to kickback and care leavers.
Thank you. Yeah, everybody's had the chance to read the minutes from the meeting on Thursday, 12th of June. Were there any amends, any points to note, anything that any councillors wanted to raise or panel members wanted to raise? Nope. Can we all be... Sorry, Councillor Bond.
It's just, I noticed there are a couple of actions and I wondered if the people who particularly raised those are happy they've been done or they're in hand.
So,
I think what we can do, because I need to just have a quick scan which actions they were, but I think what we've done for corporate and place over the last month or so is sort of developed an actions log. I think we did do this with this panel at one point. It seems to have slipped out a little bit. So I think we'll go back to the actions log of tracking the actions, making sure that the response is then shared with the panel, goes out in the agenda. We can then make sure that we're happy that actions are being completed, because I'm not too sure of the actions we've got from the last meeting, whether they have been done. I can check after the meeting if they have and then share with the panel to make sure. And then going forward, so from this meeting, we can add that actions log added to the agenda going forward.
Is that all right with everybody if we take that as an action about the actions log? Brilliant, thank you. Okay, we only have one item on the agenda this evening, and that is the annual complaints and compliments report. Obviously, we'll be walked through this report in just a second. The idea afterwards is that we have time set aside for councillors and panel members to discuss the report, ask any questions that you may have about any of the points, dig deeper into any of the complaints or data or compliments raised, and we can discuss that and see if there are any actions or suggestions that we have. So I'm going to pass over to, I'm going to assume Kevin first of all. Thank you.
Chair, and thank you, colleagues, for the report. As set out in the covering report, the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny panel have seen the entirety of the Council's complaint and compliments report for the previous financial year. The session this evening is focused on specifically the adults parts, which I'll address, and the children's parts, which my colleague Lim will pick up. It's worth saying that for adults and children, there are some statutory responsibilities for reporting, and these are what are covered in this report, along with the role of the local government and social care ombudsman. The report, I think, in summary, breaks down the statistics, and the detail is probably most interested in the appendix around the particular information. So I think if I pick up the adults part and then pass on to Lynn. So the headlines for adult services last year is that the overall number of complaints has fallen by a small amount in the year. It's a relatively small amount of number of complaints. That's 37 complaints last year, 33 this year. Put that in context, we provide support and care for over 1,500 individuals all the time. So it's a relatively small number. And as you can see in 2.6, the major theme coming out, or reasons for people's complaints, is that they were unhappy with the decisions that are made. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that we've explored about what those pieces are. But it's probably worth saying in the adults world that often the decisions we're making are effectively about the needs of an individual, when often considering a wider group. And often we see what some carers would have us do for their loved one is different from our duty to that loved one. And therefore, there's always a balance to be struck in those activities. The other point that was noted in the covering report 2.6 is that 14 complaints went to the local government and social care ombudsman. And in the appendix on the very last page of the report, you'll notice that the adult social care statutory process is that after stage 1, our first response, we effectively, in line with the guidance from the local government and social care ombudsman, people who wish to take it further come both to us and back to the LGSO at the same time. And that's why there's a significant number of LGSO reports that effectively say no further action was taken, because we've dealt with the secondary update at the same time as the LGSO has looked at it. And that's part of the process that complies with the statute. One of the things for us to consider is some other councils choose to put a phase 2, a stage 2 in place, rather than complying with the LGSO recommended approach. That has an advantage, that families get listened to directly and don't get drawn into the LGSO process. It also has a downside, that they don't feel they've necessarily got somebody independent in their corner. So there's a toss-up, and something we might want to discuss later today. I'm pleased with the improvement in timescales from 77% being answered in time to 84%. Just as a reminder for the panel, there's no national timescale for that. We've set our own in line with our corporate complaints policy of 20 working days. And that's a good improvement. I'd like to see that continue. And in particular, what I am pleased about is the number of our staff who are engaging much earlier than that 20 days to set an expectation of when the complaint will be dealt with. And I think that's been positively fed back to us as an improvement from the training. If I move into the appendix now, and in particular, there's some information for adult social care. The table number 1 on page 16 of the report breaks down the 33 complaints in the year, and you can see a reduction in the number upheld in terms of percentage from 23% to 13%, and the corresponding change in not upheld. And some of that comes down to the work that the frontline teams over the last year, based on last year's feedback, about being clearer about why they're making decisions. So people are still complaining that they don't like the outcome, but the evidence that's there for the managers who are reviewing these complaints, that the information was made available and was communicated. Now, I'm sure we could always do better, and we'll continue with our ongoing training around how to message difficult information. And in particular, one of the things we've had fed back from our staff this year is that it's still hard for them to give the hardest of messages, which might be, that's all the support that you're entitled to, without it sounding harsh. And we're still trying to get that balance between clear communication and keeping the ongoing relationship, which is very important, because often these complaints happen not when a service is over, but while we're still caring for a resident and somebody's loved one. So it's important that we see that. But there is good progress in that number of complaints that are holding forward. And I've touched on the LGSO numbers. The last thing I wanted to say in my opening remarks, in addition to the verbatim compliments you've seen, I'm very pleased to see that service users and their families continue to be generous with their compliments to staff who are dealing with them in complicated time. And it's worth making sure that this complaints and compliment reports recognises that. What I would observe for you as a panel is complaints tend to be pretty specific. I don't like this, or that didn't go very well, or this could have been better. You can see from the compliments, they're about the holistic whole, about how well families feel supported. And I think that's worth noting for staff. They can perhaps get one compliment for what might be months and months of work. A complaint can come out of one interaction that didn't go as well as people liked. And therefore, I'd like to see and make sure that people understand that what they do every day makes a difference. And I think that pulls that out. In the interest of leaving the panel to go where they'd like to go, Chair, I'll finish there and perhaps ask my colleague Lynn to pick up on children's. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Kevin. Lynn, over to you.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much, Kevin. Thank you, Chair. As Kevin said earlier on, complaints are broken down into statutory complaints, and what you will see from the report is that we have got a very small number of statutory complaints in children's services, and they're specifically related to legal frameworks and regulations. But the bulk of complaints we deal with are called corporate complaints, and these are general complaints about how children's services have provided services to the families with whom we're working. So if I concentrate initially on the corporate complaints headlines, what you will see is a decrease in the number of corporate complaints since 23-24, down to 69. The corporate complaints are dealt with in stages, stage 1 and 2. Stage 1 is responded to by a more local manager, stage 2 by a more senior manager. So you can see, if you look at the stage 1 responses, 16% of those were upheld, 36% were partially upheld, and the majority, which is 48%, were not upheld. And you'll also see from figure 6 that the main reason that people give for raising complaints is being unhappy with how a situation was handled. It's very difficult when we're working with families in the statutory intervention arena, because that intervention is very often perceived by families to be unwarranted, unhelpful, not something that they want in their lives. And so, as Kevin was talking earlier on about decisions that are made in adult services, it's quite similar in children's services. It is quite challenging to develop that relationship and to have a positive relationship at times when people are intervening in your family in a way that you don't want to see. What you will also see is that for the stage 1 corporate complaints, 68% were responded to within timescales. That means there was 32% that weren't. That is a decrease in the previous year, and we are looking at why that is. What we do know is that some of the complaints that we've had through have been really quite complicated complaints over a long period of time. And this has meant that the managers involved in responding to them have needed a bit more time to properly and fully answer those complaints because of the complex nature of them. You will also see that if a family isn't happy with a stage 1 response, they will ask for it to go to stage 2, where it is investigated by a more senior manager. So 17 of those 69 stage 1 complaints moved on to stage 2. And you will see from the report that 53% of those weren't upheld, 35% were partially upheld, and 12% not upheld. And again, the primary reason you will see is unhappy with how a situation was handled, very much like stage 1. But I'm very pleased to be able to report, as you will see from figure 9, that 82% were responded to within timescales at stage 2. And that is a significant improvement on the year before, where it was 37%. So that is very reassuring to see. If we move on to statutory complaints, there's only a handful of those that fall into the statutory arena, which is about, as I said earlier on, legal processes and procedures. We had 8 this year. And the report goes through which were upheld, which were partially upheld, which weren't upheld. And what you will also see is that 88% of those 8 were responded to within timescales, which again is an improvement on the previous year. Now, if somebody isn't happy with the response at stage 1, they can ask for a stage 2 investigation. This is a complaint that's investigated by an independent person. And we had 2 progress to stage 2. One was partially upheld and the other wasn't upheld. And then again, they can move on to stage 3. And if a complaint moves on to stage 3, that is the final stage, internal stage of the process. That is dealt with by an independent panel. And this year we had one of those that was independently investigated, and that one was upheld and was dealt with within timescales. What I think it's really important to say is that we don't just deal with complaints, we actually learn from complaints, and we've got a learning culture within children's services like Kevin described in adults. We have regular workshops between our social care teams and our complaints team. We have introduced better tracking of complaints and compliments actually, which I think is demonstrated in the increased timescales in most of our complaints. We have continued to include learning from complaints in our training for staff, because the best way you can learn is from what people are telling us, and that's really important. And we've also had whole service events where learning from complaints and compliments has been a key driver for those sessions. You will also see in the report some very service-specific responses to how we learn from complaints, and you will see that a lot of the work that services are doing are on better communication, how we can communicate more effectively with those citizens with whom we work, and how we can communicate in a more timely and effective way. There's also some learning around providing reports in a more timely way for those with whom we work, having proper escalation processes in place, and doing things like improving online forms and things like that based on the feedback we get as part of the complaints process. And lastly, I wanted to pick up on compliments because I'm very pleased to be able to see that Children's Services had 209 compliments recorded this year compared to 74 the previous year. That is a significant jump. I think that is certainly because we have got improved information sharing with staff sharing the compliments they receive with the complaints and compliments team. Figure 10 of the report shows where those compliments have come from, and I'm sure it won't be surprising to those who are listening to see that the majority of those compliments come from our family hub services. These are services where families are working with us on a voluntary basis and not a statutory basis. So it isn't a surprise that you will see that the work is more welcome within those areas of early help and support. And you'll also see in the report some really lovely quotes from some of the families we've been working with. In the interest of time, Chair, I'll leave it there, but I'm very happy to answer any questions that panel members may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lynn. So I'm going to open this up to the panel to ask any questions that you may have. So do we have anyone who would like to speak? Councillor Davies.
Thank you. Once again, it's a very positive report. It seems like everything's heading in the right direction, so congratulations on that. Said previously and over in scrutiny, I always feel like I'm nitpicking in these meetings when we have a positive report, but I've got to do that. On what's this? Figure 6. There's quite a few complaints that were held up about lack of action and failed to follow timescales. Is this because staff were just too busy to follow on with things, or they forgot, or something like that?
Apologies, Chair, I was on mute. Yeah, it is time scales about sharing information generally and sharing reports. And I think there are a number of reasons why sometimes those things aren't shared in as timely a way as we would want them to. For example, you know, there are periods of time when our staff are working very intensively with a family and there's lots of things going on for that family at that time. And sometimes it's human error, sometimes things are missed, sometimes things aren't shared in as timely a way as we would like. So there will be a number of reasons why that has happened. And certainly that work about timeliness and about sharing information is work that we undertake with our staff in those training events that I talked to you about, how we can make sure we're getting the right information to families in a good and timely way. And the lack of action may be, I don't have the details about those particular situations, so I can't answer very specifically, but it may well be that families believe that something should happen in a particular timescale that might differ from the timescale that would be seen as acceptable by professionals. Again, there could be a number of reasons why the person who is complaining and staff have got different views about action or lack of action. But you know, as I said earlier on, all of the complaints we receive go through a robust quality assurance process. We do pick up individual and collective learning from these complaints, and we do make sure we're feeding that back into training with staff so we can be more efficient and more effective when we are communicating with families. Thank you.
Yes, go ahead,
Yeah.
Councillor Davies.
Do you use any software to keep track of things that need to be done? I know at my work we have project management software. You can have a task in progress, done, in review, that kind of thing with deadlines. Wonder if that would help. It's not really a question, but.
No, and I think that's really helpful. And yes, we do have a process for recording all of the actions that come out of complaints and other things. and that is reviewed in our performance board to make sure that we're actually following through on those learnings. So yeah, good point. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Jervis.
Thank you. First of all, congratulations on getting the number of complaints down and everything. In figure 10, you have a breakdown of compliments received across family centres, send and everything. Do you have a similar chart of breakdown of where the complaints are?
Yes, yes, we do, and the complaints are predominantly, as you would expect, within the statutory arena, and that goes with what I said earlier on, which is very often our social workers in our statutory area are intervening with families at a very emotional and very difficult time for families. Families aren't always open and willing and wanting social workers to be working with their families, and it's a very difficult time for everybody, and it is those situations where we would see more complaints, because we're working with families on a statutory basis. It's not a voluntary arrangement, and that does very often make those relationships at particular points quite fraught and quite difficult. So, I would expect to see more complaints during those particular periods of time. That isn't to say that we accept those complaints and we don't do anything with them, because there is always learning about how we can do things better. But, generally, yes, you will see more complaints in the statutory arena, where we're having to work with families, as I said, sometimes under very difficult circumstances.
Of those statutory complaints, right?
Apologies, I didn't.
There's no particular breakdown of the subject of those statutory complaints. Maybe I'm misunderstanding.
So you're wanting to see the way we broke down the compliments per service. I think what you're saying is you'd like to see a similar graph.
Well, yeah, I'd like to, for example, I'd like to know if there were lots of complaints about send provision or about a particular provision. So I wanted to know kind of what the subject of was, not just they were statutory, but what was the subject? Is there a breakdown of the subject? Can we say, okay, this is all related to send services, or this is all related to other family services, for example? Yes. Is there any trends in that?
Yeah, well, that isn't in, as you can see, isn't in the report, but that's certainly something I can take away and make sure that we put in for next time, so we can break down where those complaints are coming from. What I would say, as I said earlier on, when I was talking about statutory services, I was including send, because you will see that I know the majority of complaints will be in the statutory social work teams and in the send team, those statutory services who are working with families, as I said, at quite difficult times in their lives. But I think it would be absolutely fine, and I think right and appropriate for us to be able to include a graph like that in future reports, so I can make sure we do that.
Yeah, thanks. Because I expect considerable pressure around send, and so I just wanted to see if that was reflected.
Yeah.
The other one, just very briefly, in paragraph 6.7, you say the majority is upheld, but really, I would say the majority of complaints, 52%, were either partially or fully, were not upheld, but I would say the majority, which is 52%, is actually fully or partially upheld. I think 52% is bigger than 48%, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it's how you cut those numbers, but yes.
Yeah, but it's not a first past the post, is it? It's the majority. It's either partially or fully upheld or not upheld, and partially or fully upheld is bigger than not upheld.
Yes, but partially upheld, partially upheld could be, one small part of an overall complaint. Yeah. So that wouldn't be the same as the whole complaint being upheld, but I take your point.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Gosling.
My question is really similar to Mark Jervis's. I wanted to know specifically what the type of complaints were, not just amongst the children, but amongst the adults. Is it possible to find that out without getting into revealing too much data? Because I can't see that here. You can see unhappy with the house situation, but my question is there any way we can find out what these situations are exactly or not?
I'm certainly happy to have a look at it. In adult social care, there's probably 4 or 5 different teams. And one of the things we need to be careful of is with our data protection responsibility, typically with data sets of any number smaller than 5, we wouldn't recognise it. And for example, in the adult social care world, when we're talking about the decisions that have been upheld or partially upheld, there's only 11 in total, and we do that across 5 or 6 teams. I suddenly give you a graph with a whole load of withheld, doesn't really help, but I'm certainly happy to have a look. What I would observe in adult social care is that it's more about the bit as Lynn was describing, what's the stage in the conversation. So the most challenging we get, whether it's in our learning disabilities team, our mental health team, or our community team, the most common place where we get a complaint is effectively around how we apply the funding regulations. So it doesn't really matter what team it's in, it's the same argument. Whether you've got a learning disability or a mental health need, it's the same process.
So quite a few of the complaints about not getting the funding, for example. My question was not about the funding, really. I was just wondering if there are other things that people might be concerned about, but we haven't got the information here.
So if I may come back, Chair, if I take adults, for example, if you look at the stage 1 complaints in figure 1, there is 27, I can't do this on my head, 31. There's 31 there. Unhappy with the decision made. Within that, over half are around the financial assessment regime. Short of telling you every single case, which I'm not going to do because of the individual protection of rights, I don't think we can give you, because the numbers are so small, I think it's hard to give you more of a breakdown than we have, but we'll certainly look at it by team if we can.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Purnima.
An equality impact assessment on these complaints and the compliments, because I see there is an equality impact assessment attached on whether or not this should be published. But do you collect and analyze equalities information of the complainants, for example? Do you provide the opportunity for them to provide their equalities information in terms of whether they're disabled, their race and ethnicity, sex, etc.? And do you then analyze that, disaggregate the complaints by the protected characteristics and look at whether there is any disproportionate impact on any of the protected characteristics?
Thank you. Who would like to take that one? Over to you, Kevin.
Thank you. It's a really good question. On this particular report, we haven't done that assessment. My recollection, and I will go back and check, is that the corporate report, which is a much larger data set, does have an analysis, but I will take away from this a specific question about adults, because I don't know. It's a really good question. What we do know from the individual cases is what are the cultural factors, but the question you asked about the wider learning is a really good one, and I'll follow it up.
Yeah, if I can just add, Chair, I think it's a really excellent question. And likewise, I'll go back and find that out. What I can say is I don't think we do enough in terms of learning from those protected characteristics that you've talked about. So I've just taken a note of that, and I'll take that back to the team because I think it's a really, really important point. So thank you for raising it.
Thank you. Councillor Da Costa.
Thank you. I think looking overall, I kind of understand that sometimes people aren't happy about decisions that are being made, or they're not happy about the amount of funding they get towards their care. But the one thing that was a little bit worrying for me was the fact that we had an upheld complaint about the attitude of staff, and then 2 partially upheld because of attitude of staff. Is there anything that you can add to this regarding that? Was there training put in place? Was it like just a one-off, or is there quite often people behave with an attitude when they're not happy in their work because they're not supported sufficiently. So that's what I'm trying to ask. What was the result of those upheld complaints?
Thank you. So you're referring to the items in adults. So again, forgive me, colleagues, I'm not going to go into specific cases, and we're talking about 2 cases. What we've recognised is one of the challenges is around the language we give people to communicate difficult decisions. And coming back to the question that we just answered about, do we think about all the cultural impacts? Some people say that's a spade, and other people call it an implement for digging the ground. And when we look at it, we appreciate that we've not understood the impact of our language. And we've certainly learned that in adults, and there's we've reworked some of our communication training during the year. I think if I'm also honest, and Lynn's already touched on this, some of these conversations are really difficult, and we've already acknowledged how difficult they are for families and individuals. Sometimes they're difficult for staff who are dealing with it all day, every day. Yeah. And there is something around the way we provide support and guidance to our staff. So the other thing we've been looking at is what are we encouraging people to do so they can bring their frustrations back into a safe space and not share them with our residents. So those are the 2 things we've done in adults. Doesn't excuse it. And I'm also absolutely clear that when the managers are reviewing what they've seen, if we've fallen below a high standard, it's right that we apologise and make it right.
And I just wanted to ask about the, when we look at the Ombudsman figures, that per 100,000, we have 8.4 upheld complaints compared to the average of 5.3. Is that, I don't believe for a second it means that we have poorer services. Is that about the type of people that we serve who feel that they're more able to complain, or is it that we're genuinely not giving a good service?
I'll let this on some. We try and look at understand it. I think there's, Councillor, you've touched on a couple of common threads. We're very fortunate in this borough that we have a very able, well-educated resident base, and that's great for service development. It also means they fight hard when they want to, when they think they're right, and that does come through in some complaints. But likewise, the Ombudsman also interprets an awful lot of guidance, and one of the things we've talked about in this group before in different areas is what's our policy. National policy is not, especially in adult social care, there's quite a big wide range in that governance, and often we find the Ombudsman has a different opinion to us on guidelines as opposed to statutes. So in adults, most of the places where we end up saying, well, fine, we'll effectively go with what you say, Ombudsman, because people have asked you to be involved, we'll amend our policy in future, rather than we've just got it wrong. It's often a difference of opinion. Thank you for the difficult question.
And Chair, are you happy for me to come in on that point? Yeah. Just to add that we have just very recently undertaken a piece of work looking in detail, having a deep dive into all of the LGSCO complaints that were in related to children's services, and we are doing some learning work on those particular situations. And they are, you know, as Kevin has alluded to, they are about very often points of law, etc., particularly around early years and SEND. You know, those are the 2 key areas in children's services, but we're doing some deep dive work on those particular complaints. And I'm very happy to feed back any learning, any general learning from those to the panel.
Thank you both. Councillor Shaw.
Yeah, first I'd like to just thank you both and all your teams and everyone working on this, because it's great to see positive results, especially on top of looking at last year's report where we had very positive improvement that time. So to get improvement on top of improvement is obviously a great thing. My questions are again going to be nitpicky, but it's to do with the Ombudsman report. And since we've had the improvement year on year, one thing that struck out to me was that we've had a drop in the satisfactory remedies provided by the council before it got to the ombudsman, with 0 out of 13 being satisfactory. Is that a specific trend we're seeing in those specific circumstances, or is this, what are the learnings we've got from this?
From that perspective, you can see in the Ombudsman report that nationally, only about 10% get this. Typically, we're in a situation here where councils have exhausted their complaints policy and are often clear on what they believe the situation is. The Ombudsman and the person making the complaint may have different opinions. I think it just shows that often in adult social care, you'll look at the number 30 that are assessed and closed. Those are ones where often, as I said in the start, from adult social care, they come to us for a first response from the respondent and the Ombudsman at the same time. Effectively, they don't get investigated by the Ombudsman because we've already made the changes. So there's 30, those we don't count in that number. Those ones are the ones where we've said after a second review, we still think we're right. And I think we're right to stand the ground if we think we're right, because often it's testing our policy. And if we then say, well, we'll adjust our policy, there's often ramifications that we need to understand exactly where the edges are of that. So for example, I'll take a common theme in adult social care is an individual says, we didn't do something for them or we didn't pay for something. Our records show that for over 9 months, we tried to engage, tried to negotiate, and there was absolutely no engagement, no willingness. When the Ombudsman hear it, they say, well, that's gone on too long. It doesn't matter what the substance is, you should have acted quicker, council. Well, we've been acting for 9 months to try and reach an agreement that we think is reasonable and fair. Effectively, we're not going to just, so we'll change our position just so the Ombudsman says, oh, good, you did it before we told you. We'll keep arguing till the end. And I think that's right when we are holding a point of principle. So one of the things that I look at when I look at these is what are we actually arguing with the Ombudsman about? If it's the difference between 1 degree or 2 degrees, well, that's nonsense for everybody involved. If it's a point of policy principle, then we need to be clear on what our grounds is, and we will stay with it through the process, which enables the Ombudsman then to say, you didn't resolve it until we got involved, actually, because we often value their opinion.
And when you've been looking at these, do you agree with the ones we've been fighting on, or do you think we're partial?
I'd like to think that if I had agreed with the Ombudsman, I would have spotted it earlier. And I can say that, and I can say because all of the complaints that go to the Ombudsman do pass my desk, so I know what's there. They often are, what is the interpretation of some guidance and the way it fits together? And it's a helpful learning experience. Do I always agree with the Ombudsman's decision? No, but we do recognise that we've signed up to the Code of Conduct. And when the Ombudsman says this is the outcome, you'll see the following table says that we comply with the recommendations and we take the learning from it. I don't always agree, but that's what we do.
Then I just have one more question Ombudsman-wise. So last year, the Ombudsman letter recommended the good practice guides and the new complaint handling code. And I think I asked last year whether we were doing this, and you said it was being worked on. And in this report, we've got it went to audit and governance and action plan to be instated this year, because I think it's from April 2026 we're held to it. I can't find in that audits and governance meeting in June what part of the agenda, where was it, this plan? Because I've got there's a variety of draft notices and things, but I can't find anything to do with this action plan. Was this the right meeting, or have I just can't find it, which is possible, certainly.
Very Councillor, I don't know the answer, but I do know the plan exists because it's been reviewed at the executive team. But we'll happily take an action to find it for you and make sure people know where it is.
Fabulous, thank you.
Lynn, before we move on, did you have anything that you wanted to add specifically about children's when it came to the Ombudsman? Are you happy?
Yeah, Chair, just something, because I think the question was a good one, and I agree with everything Kevin has said, but we are out of step, as you've identified, Councillor, and hence that's why in Children's Services we are doing a deep dive to understand why we're out of step with similar authorities. We need to understand what's that about. Once we do that, as I said earlier on, I'm very happy to share our wider learning with the panel. Thank you.
Thank you both. Councillor Bond.
Thank you. I, like others have said, I thought it was good that there's so much information on complaints and compliments that's in the public domain. I read the compliments and data issues have been mentioned. And I thought, yes, you do have to be very careful about what you say about specific complaints. But then when I got to the Ombudsman's report, you could click through and see a little sort of potted example, anonymised, of course, of what the complaint was about. And of course, if as a ward councillor I ever get copied in on a complaint, I do read it very carefully. So I felt overall I got a balance between the compliments and the complaints side, because actually knowing what they're about helped paint a picture and really get me into it rather than just the bare statistics. So really two questions. Do you think that the complaints that go through to the Ombudsman are a sort of typical subset of all complaints? So do they paint a realistic picture of the sort of complaints we get? And then on children's complaints, if we were in an ideal world, what would you like that would really reduce that number of complaints? Is there anything that comes to mind? Thank you.
Lynn, over to you on that one.
In an ideal world, of course, we wouldn't want any complaints, because that means we'd be doing everything very well, or not, as the case may be. I think the issue, as I said earlier on, is that our staff are very often working in very complicated, very difficult situations with families where there's lots of high emotion. But what I would like to see is, however difficult that relationship is, family saying, I may not agree with what the social worker is doing, but I understand why they've made that decision, because they've been really clear with me about that decision. They have communicated that decision with me effectively and in a timely way, and I have seen evidence of that in minutes of meetings or in reports that have been communicated with me in a timely way. And I believe that in the majority of situations, our staff in the main do that and achieve that. In some situations, as we can see from this report, that doesn't happen. And those are the areas where we are working with staff to try and improve that. We're never going to please everybody all of the time, but if I could be assured that we are doing all we can to make that happen. I can't take away the difficulty of the situation. I can't take away the emotion. But what we can do is work on the things, the little things that irritate you or I if we're dealing with another company. The communication, the report writing, the timeliness. Those are the things that if I could wave a magic wand, those would be my top priorities. And as I say, in the majority of situations, our staff achieve that. Sometimes, as this report shows, they don't, and they fall short of what we would like to see. And that's why we have got a training and development programme in place to learn from these sorts of things. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kevin, did you want to come in on that? Or?
So I was going to come back on Councillor Bond's question about, does the Ombudsman set of vignettes of complaints represent the typical set? And I'd need to go back and double check, but my sense is complaints to us about behaviour and the he said, she said type complaints, where we're agreed about the facts or the policy or what law applies, those probably don't get as often to the Ombudsman, because those are the ones we tend to resolve through local work, whereas the Ombudsman ones tend to be where we think we've done the right thing and we think we've understood the policy. So my personal sense, and it's not a data-driven piece, is the Ombudsman probably reflects the areas of policy and governance that effectively there's a difference of opinion between ourselves and our residents, and the Ombudsman doesn't necessarily see some of those we argued about effectively how the way we behaved on a given day, because we tend to resolve those because they're very hard to understand who's in the wrong.
Brilliant, thank you. I just had a couple of questions, actually more around the compliments side. Do we actively encourage service users to provide positive feedback? Or obviously complaints will come quite naturally if somebody's unhappy, and we know it's quite difficult to get compliments from people. So is that something which we actively ask for? And linked to that, do we use those compliments to promote the service? I'm thinking it's probably more, Lynn, on your side around the family hubs. We know that they do such exceptional work, but many families may either not know that they exist or might feel that there might be a stigma around going and asking for that help. So do we utilise these compliments in any type of way?
Thank you for that question. We don't ask families to send in compliments. We absolutely don't. What we do ask families to do is to provide us with feedback. So we have got a family feedback form, and that form, during our intervention with the family and at the end of the intervention with families, that form will go out to them and they will be encouraged to feed back. So it's not give us a compliment, please. It is what is your feedback? And if there is some positive, and there very often is positive feedback, that is when we encourage staff to send that information to our complaints and compliments team so that can be recorded. And I'm sorry, Chair, I couldn't remember the second part of your question.
That's all right. I was just wondering whether we ever use snippets of those compliments to promote the service, to give confidence to other families within RBWM about the type of brilliant support that we do offer.
Yes, Chair, we absolutely do. Obviously, we have to be very careful. This is a very small borough in, how much of those we use, but if we can use them anonymously and it helps to promote the services we offer, we absolutely do use them, yes.
Thank you. Just a last check to see if anyone had anything else. Councillor Baskerville, over to you.
Yeah, I was just flicking through the report, and I noticed one area. I'm not sure if there's any detail or not, but hospital discharge pathways. I know this is an area which gets mentioned nationally, about the link between getting people back into the community from hospitals and, as it were, moving them along. I mean, I just wonder how well do we find local hospitals in this area cope with discharges, and have we got a good relationship with them? Because you still hear stories on the news sometimes of people bed blocking and all the rest of it. I don't know if that's an issue here or if we've got a good relationship.
Thank you, Councillor Baskerville. The short answer is yes, we do have a good relationship with the two hospitals who most often deal with our residents. That's Wexham Park and Frimley. The Frimley Hospital, which is in the south of the borough, is probably the one that has the highest level of demand for us. We do a good job at getting people discharged from hospital. Over the last 2 years, we've worked very closely with the NHS, both the Integrated Commissioning Board and the Acute Trust there, to make sure that people are able to move forward. And we've doubled the rate of people who come out of hospital by making sure we get them back home. The complaints come about when there's some confusion about what people should get because of their health condition, when they're no longer requiring acute medical intervention, but they still need health support, versus when they need some short-term care to enable them to get back on their feet. And I'm sure we all recognise from our own experience what it's like when you've been in hospital for a while. When you come out day 1, day 2, day 3, you often need to just sleep well and eat a bit better before you start to even think about what does recovery look like. And that's where we're working hard to make sure we get those together. And what we often hear from people is they get care on day 1, day 2, maybe into week 2 or 3, but then health steps away and it becomes care. And you know what I'm going to say next. Health is free at the point of delivery. Care is means tested. And that's the piece that we don't get in people's head soon enough, so that it becomes an issue then when they're at home and on their own and they recognise it's their responsibility. So what we're trying to do more in concert with our health colleagues is put information into people's hands and into carers and families' hands when they're in hospital to plan for what might be a discharge in a few days, a few weeks, or a couple of weeks later, particularly for our older group of residents who effectively might not get back to where they were. So that people are thinking about setting up care, because unlike health, which is free at the point of delivery, health will tell you what they're going to do for you. At care, you have a choice to make, particularly if you're paying for it yourself, and people need the time to make those decisions. So that's where we get most of those complaints. But we do have a good relationship, and we have staff directly placed in the hospital having those conversations.
Excellent, thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So just a quick kind of summing up from me, I think it's really clear the amount of hard work that goes into both adults and children's services from both yourselves, Kevin and Lynn, and your entire teams. And it really comes through very strongly, the whole ethos of continuous development, continuous learning, and how every piece of feedback, you know, good, bad, indifferent, gets fed back into the team to ensure that changes are always at the forefront. And I think it probably goes for all of us to say that, you know, our children's and adult services are a jewel in the crown of RBWM. And it's clear to see that we really do excel in these areas. So thank you to everybody for all of their hard work, and appreciate as well the message that these are hard jobs to do and you're dealing with very emotional situations, and that's tough on staff and on the service users as well. So thank you very much for coming and speaking through the report with us. So we've just got one more item on the agenda, and that is the work programme. And obviously we've had the Cabinet forward plan. Is there anything anybody would like to discuss? Any ideas for future work programme items or items for the agenda? No, I know we have quite a full agenda for the next panel meeting in January, but obviously if anybody thinks of anything that they would like to raise, any areas that they would like us to look into where scrutiny could be of benefit, please do let us know, and we can either look to add them to January if we have space, or the next meeting in March. Okay, well, I think that's it for the meeting. Thank you everybody for attending.